It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. We're back. You know, I just, for the record, the issue of, and I brought this up in our first segment, the issue of border security in the United States is, you know, we're constantly told the border is too wide for us to be able to secure, and that there's no way to do that with a fence or whatever. You know, we've been guarding the border between North and South Korea for the last 60 years plus, and we've been doing it very, very adequately. Now, for the record, just so you know, the width of the 39th parallel of between North and South Korea is about 160 physical miles, and it's 160 physical miles of some very rough terrain. So, you know, when they argue that we can't cover our border because it's 4 times that, hey, you know what? That's just another lie, misrepresenting the truth. Where there's a will, there's a way. And there's absolutely no reason why we cannot secure our border. And it's time for you to tell your congressman, it's time for you to tell your House member, enough's enough. That number, by the way, for you to call them is area code 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. Call your congressman and say, look, enough's enough. Seal the border first. After that, we can have any discussion we want. But if you vote for anything less than sealing the border first and stopping the bleeding, I will know that you have sold me as a constituent down the river. That's it, folks. But they need to get massive calls. All right, we're going to talk about the issue here of the fiscal house. You know, China officially warned the United States yesterday that we got to get our act together. And, you know, the problem with this is that Obama is intentionally frightening people, including the world and the markets, because he's trying to, just like he's doing with the shutdown, make the pain, and he did this with sequester too. So we know it's like a pattern now, right? I mean, this isn't something that's new. It's a clear and obvious pattern. He's attempting to instill fear into the marketplace, into the world investment community, into the American people. I'm not saying that we should go and default on our debt. What I am saying is that we're not dealing with honest brokers here. And that's the problem. We are not dealing with honest brokers. And so therefore, it's really not a function of the debt. The problem here is not the debt. The problem here is the people who are involved in making it, passing it, approving it, and enlarging it. It's not the debt that's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. It's the people who make the debt. They're not honest brokers. They're violative of everything that we as Americans stand for. We claim that our fiscal conservativeness and is a foundational principle of our nation, that we cannot allow our nation to be endangered on a national security basis because of an unwieldy debt. In fact, Barack Obama himself, when he was running in 2008, claimed that the Bush debt that he was voting against as a member of the Senate at the time, that Bush debt was a risk of national security classification, and that it was un-American and unpatriotic to increase that debt. And yet he comes on board and does the self-same thing, writ large, times 10. We don't even know. And by the way, every other president during a debt limit increase has come out and said, this is the amount I want you to write the check for. And he won't even do that. He's leaving it up to Harry Reid and the Congress to determine what that check ought to be. Really? Those drunken sailors? No, thank you. China is the biggest foreign creditor that we have. They currently possess in about, give or take a couple of $1 billion in any direction. At any given moment, they hold about $1.3 trillion in U.S. debt. They superseded Japan, back in 2008. It used to be Japan who owned the most debt. Even though everybody thought it was China all that time, it really wasn't. It was Japan. Japan owns about $1.1 trillion. China owns $1.3 trillion. So the two combined are about, $2.5 trillion of our $17 trillion debt. For the record, the vast majority of that debt is not held by foreigners, folks. The largest percentage of our debt has been stolen from Social Security, and the piggy bank of Social Security has been filled with a bunch of empty IOUs. Number one. Number two, the vast majority of our debt, and which exceeds what China and Japan own collectively, is the Federal Reserve itself, whose balance sheet has grown to $3.84 trillion. Wow. Dollars. Now, where did the Federal Reserve get $3.4 trillion to buy debt? They didn't. They printed it. They didn't have $3.4 trillion laying around to invest. They just made the money up. Now you understand why your dollar is worth less. Gas hasn't really gone up. Food hasn't really gone up. Price of clothing hasn't really gone up. The dollar is falling. And it just takes more dollars to get those things that you need. That pound of chopped meat, that pair of sneakers that you need to get your kid for school. The gasoline that goes into your car. The price of things is not really moving. The value of money is slipping. And, at some point, the Federal Reserve has got to stop buying our debt at the rate of $1 trillion a year. So, look, guys, in a year we're going to be talking about this, and the Fed's going to be in possession of $5 trillion in debt. $5 trillion. They're buying it at the rate of $1 trillion a year, basically. If that doesn't scare the poop out of you, I don't know what does. They're buying $85 billion a month in mortgage securities and in treasuries. $85 billion a month. Do the math. They are buying almost all of our deficit debt, which means China's not really buying anymore. That, in fact, China has been static at the $1.3 trillion mark for quite some time now. Japan is actually kind of, dropping a little bit. Why? Because they don't want any more of our debt, because they realize that, quite frankly, at this point, they're almost throwing good money after bad. The real problem here, folks, is that China is now coming out and saying, you guys got to get it together. The other real problem here is that just the actual amount of debt that they own, which is, $1.3 trillion in bonds, right? These are treasury bonds. And if you're not familiar in how the treasury works, there are bills and then there are bonds. The bills are short term. They're, usually less than a year. They can be 1 day, they can be 365 days, or anything in between, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day treasury bills, okay? And they have a very low interest. It's like 1%. The bills that run, or the bonds that run between the 5 and 10 year, they're a little bit higher. They're about 2.5%. And when you buy that, you lay down $1,000, and at the end of at the end of the period, you get back payments every year to meet the 2.5%. And at the end of the period, you redeem the bond and you get your entire $1,000 back. Okay. The long-term notes, which are 30-year notes, those are the ones where the interest rate's high, and it's about 5%. And China owns a mishmash of, treasuries, whether they are, short-term, mid-term, or long-term. The other thing that they have is that they are in possession of about $3.5 trillion of dollar-denominated assets. Now, the question is, we don't know exactly what makes up all of those. But I got to tell you, they own a lot of real estate here. And that's one of the areas that they're predominantly concerned about. It's not necessarily the 1.3 trillion in treasuries, because the treasury is guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, right? And we have the money to pay those. I mean, look, folks, the interest we drill in about $225 billion, of which. Actually, our debt service, this is per month, our debt service to that is about $25 billion. So that leaves us $200 billion to do with as we need to take care of Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, and all the other nonsense. The truth is, if we take out of our economy and our budget, our federal budget, if we take the amount of money that is mandated by law, and most of the spending that we get on these entitlement programs is mandated by law. In other words, Social Security must be paid, right? Medicare must be paid. Veterans benefits must be paid. These are not optional. By law, they must be paid, which is, by the way, another problem. Obamacare is being inserted into that must be paid category, right? That's why the House is fighting so hard against it, because it's a whole new entitlement program. And, Reagan said it best, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. Because once they're started, you can never kill them. People become addicted and dependent upon these entitlement programs. But if you take all of our entitlement programs and you take that out of our annualized budget, we can handle that based on just our income now. What would have to be cut is all of this nonsensical garbage spending. The $2.5 million to some university to study why lesbians are fat. Yes, that's a real study, people. I'm not making that up. The boondoggles, like $500 million being lost with Solyndra. Yeah, that. The $25 million to the $100 million to the $250 million that's allocated to some wind farm in the middle of a desert in bent elbow nowhere, that's going to produce enough electricity that you could exceed it by putting a bicycle to a generator and just pedaling all day. Yeah, that. I mean, come on. The ridiculousness of some of this spending is so over the top. $100 million to Harry Reid's, BFF in Vegas. The casinos in the immigration bill. $100 million. Why should we give $100 million to the casinos in Vegas? They do their daily withdrawal from millions of Americans anyway. I mean, the whole thing here is so incomprehensible, the amount of spending that we have that is absolutely surplus spending. It's unnecessary. It is cronyism. It is corruption. It's bribery. Come on, man. The Solyndra thing was a clear scam. The guy who ran Solyndra was a favorite from the Obama administration because he was a fundraiser for him. They ran up a ton of debt, absconded off with taxpayer money, and nothing will happen to them because it was all legal. Because they can afford attorneys. When the government gives them $500 million, they can afford the attorneys to write the loopholes they need in the contracts they have. I mean, look, these people are intelligent. And the best new business in the United States of America right now is sucking money out of the federal government. It's the best industry in the country. It's the most profitable. And it's the one that, for all intents and purposes, never seems to fail. No matter how bad the economy gets, that business, that industry does great. Well, let's apply for a grant. That government, they got plenty of money over there. We'll do just fine. There's no accountability. There's no requirement that they use the money properly. There's no assurance that if they go bankrupt, that we get to go get assets to cover the cost. That's how banks lend. Why would the United States do anything different? Well, these aren't loans, you fool. They're grants. Exactly. Because you anticipate their failure and you don't want to protect the American people. Now, China's real concern here is not the $1.3 trillion that they hold in government bonds. Their real concern is the $3.5 trillion that they have in the dollar-denominated assets, and that makes up a lot of things: real estate, corporate bonds, and things like that. But if the economy is tanked by a default, real estate values will crash, and all of these corporations that have bonds out there that the Chinese have purchased, those bonds will become worthless because the economy will be so destroyed that, IBM won't be able to sell the widgets they sell, and Microsoft won't have people buying computers all day long because Microsoft will now be vying with the grocery store for whether they're going to get the bread money. The truth of the matter is this. We have allowed our nation to be co-opted by foreign investment. We have a debt that we could not possibly hope to pay back. I gave you some numbers and examples yesterday when I pulled up usdebtclock.org. I encourage you to go to that website. It's called usdebtclock.org. And I want you to look at that. When you hold your mouse over these entries that are on there, it'll tell you what that entry means. And towards the bottom, as you get down to the bottom, you look at the unfunded liabilities. Now, these are the liabilities for which we don't have any idea where we're going to get the money from. These are the expenditures that we don't have a specific account, if you will, that's going to pay for those. We don't know how they're going to get paid for. That's why they're called unfunded. And folks, they exceed the asset value of the United States. That in any accounting concept, that is default. That is insolvency. When your assets are lower than your liabilities, you are insolvent. That's how companies go bankrupt. The collection of their factories, their produced labor, their product sales don't equal the amount of money they owe the banks. And they are insolvent. They file for bankruptcy protection. They wipe all the debt away. Most of it's government guaranteed. The banks get a big payoff, and they emerge from bankruptcy protection after taking all of the public stock that the individual Joe six-pack owns, and they wipe that out. They may as well just throw it on a bonfire. And then they emerge from bankruptcy protection with a clean slate and no balance. I mean, it's an unbelievable scam. The dollar is depreciating, ladies and gentlemen, and it's depreciating at an alarming rate. The dollar is the denomination that is used as the world's reserve currency. That is all endangered by this issue. But the real problem here is the fact that the debt itself we could pay. But we can't pay the debt with the current people who are managing it. It's that simple. The debt cannot be paid with the current crop of people in Washington who run it, manage it, increase it, and spend it. It's that simple. If you ran a business and you found that your manager was stealing from you and squandering your money and giving out free product to his friends and diverting money away from the company into his own private coffers, or using your business and it's his influence in managing your business to get private personal benefit, you would fire that person. You would probably prosecute them criminally for fraud and embezzlement. And our Congress and our president and our judiciary are all guilty of the same crime. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit about the final topic, which is the IRS mail scandal. You know, Darrell Issa, has uncovered the fact and blown the story open that the IRS, many officials within the IRS were using private email accounts to send IRS information so that they could avoid that information being stored on servers where it would be accessible at a later date to investigators. Hey, folks, when you hide a crime, that just shows pre-existing knowledge. That's how a crime becomes first degree over second degree. Premeditation. We're going to return in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. We'll be right back.